Hello and welcome to our third SiGMA Virtual Roadshow in Manila. This 2-hour conference will delve into 3 areas of debate, bringing key themes specific to Asia such as regulation and trends, tax and compliance, and emerging tech to a table of thought leaders and academics at the top of their game. We would like to extend our warm welcome to our viewers. Thank you very much for tuning in. And of course, this expo wouldn't be made possible without our speakers, to our sponsors, and of course, our exhibitors. Thank you very much. Now to kick off this program, please allow me to welcome our most valuable guest. We are pleased to have the PAGCOR chairwoman, Ms. Andrea D. Domingo, to deliver the opening keynote.
Welcome to the SiGMA's Virtual Roadshow Manila 2021. I believe that what SiGMA is doing is really very important to the industry. And I'm really very proud and happy to be once again invited as a keynote speaker in this year's virtual conference. Most participants like us include the movers and shakers of the gaming industries from all over the world. This virtual roadshow is a testament to the gaming industry and its service providers' flexibility, adaptability, and resilience amidst the challenges of the global health crisis caused by COVID-19. In the world, the casino gaming industry has been immensely affected by this pandemic. Lockdowns, movement restrictions, unpredictability of all of these things forced many of us in the gaming companies all over the world to close for weeks or even months, with absolutely no revenues, but with a lot of fixed costs and operational expenditures. The Philippine gaming industry was not spared either, as it saw significant all-time decline in gross gaming revenues. The country's gaming industry, GGR in 2020, only reached 87.54 billion pesos, or an equivalent of 1.81 billion US dollars, a very significant 59% decline from our 2019 industry GGR of 213.53 billion pesos, or 4.41 billion US dollars. At the onset of 2021, the Philippine gaming industry is doing its best to stay afloat by coming up with solutions, strategies, innovations, and to cope with the situation. Our main goal now is to keep our 11,000 employees employed with full compensation and not to have any deficit or losses in our operation. So it's a break-even point that we are achieving. But this is even very difficult because revenues are quite hard to predict now because of the volatility of the situation. The changes in the area classifications in all over the Philippines would affect how we operate, how we close, when to operate, when to close. The curfews are also sometimes really unreasonable, making casino operations which occur during nighttime almost impossible. Like in Metro Manila, we have a 6 o'clock in the evening curfew, and everybody knows that players are not mostly night people, so that is also a very bad problem for us. Due to the closures of many gaming establishments as early as March 29, 2020, we are losing an average GGR of 144 million a day, 55% of which come from the licensed casinos and 21 million pesos a day, or 45% from other gaming establishments. As Fitch Ratings predicted in its Outlook report, the impact of the pandemic to the gaming industry in Asia this year will be less acute, as potential of vaccine availability will allow destination markets to begin recovering, which is proving not to be that accurate because the availability of vaccines is now controlled by the more advanced first world countries. The report likewise noted that online segments will continue to enjoy outsized growth, especially in the event of more lockdowns. This may not again be that accurate because, for example, the lockdowns are getting worse, and we just have to grapple with the fact that there are more infections now than before. Therefore, we're hoping that online gaming platforms will give the local gaming industry a chance to ride in this tide of growth. As COVID-19 cases rise in our country, we have to find ways to innovate and reach more diverse markets both here and abroad. Before I said we need regulation with competence and integrity. Now we need another aspect, which is creativity and imagination. One way of doing this is to continue what many gaming markets worldwide are adopting and more, the use of modern technology and digital platforms in the delivery of and improvement of services, which SiGMA is presenting to us. But we must also be creative in looking at our expenses, OPEX, marketing. Where do we maximize marketing? Where do we suppress it? Where do we maximize the use of all of our resources? Whereas before, we had so much of it that there was very little attention to maybe small expenditures that could be avoided. But now, we are really belt tightening. Alongside the use of digital and online platforms, regulatory policies for offshore gaming operations must be strengthened. Therefore, to protect also the legitimate operators and help them preserve their revenues, we forge stronger partnerships with the Office of the President, the Philippine National Police, the Bureau of Immigration, the National Bureau of Immigration, and they are now actively curbing illegal online gambling in the country. Just yesterday, there were 27 foreigners who are undocumented operating an online gaming facility who were apprehended by the police and by the Bureau of Immigration. Today, we continue to be an active partner in the Interagency Task Force on Employment of Foreign Nationals, together with DOLE and the Bureau of Immigration, but most especially with the AMLAC, Anti-Money Laundering Council. But more importantly for us now is to give support to the online gaming operators. Like for example, most of their employees are foreign workers. So we network with the issuance of visas to the foreign affairs. We network with the Bureau of Immigration for the special work permits. We network with the Department of Labor and Employment for their alien employment permits. We even network with the airlines and the travel agencies to give them seats in their airlines coming in and going out of the country. And most of all, we have to network with the Bureau of Quarantine and with all of the health and medical services in the country. Also, I think it's very important to keep up with the fast-paced shift to digital landscape. That is why we need SiGMA for the information that it gives us about suppliers, about markets, and about everything that is new, even the auditing systems that are needed. We have in the Philippines also introduced live shots, which means online betting, but those who could play would be only the VIP players in the integrated resorts and casinos. Another breakthrough and another product that we're introducing this year under the mandate of the Office of the President is the regulation of e-sabong. Sabong is cockfighting. And in the Philippines, cockfighting really is a national sport and a very popular local gaming activity. With this, we hope to be able to raise this year about 3 billion pesos in revenues. And coupled with this, again, is the enforcement of the anti-illegal task force of all the laws so that those who are operating, who are paying taxes to the government, are actually protected and the illegal ones are closed down and punished. Moving forward, I believe that despite the impact of the pandemic in the gaming sector, we shall overcome. This cannot be permanent, it will be temporary, and by the end of the year, I think that we should be able to meet our targets, which is one, to remain intact, two, to be able to open up new venues, three, to have all of our employees still employed, enjoying full compensation packages and health benefits. We will not be losing, we will not have a red mark in our bottom line. With the help of the latest digital trends, such as the ones that will be showcased here in SiGMA's Roadshow, I think that we can really have new paths created ahead of us. As for the Philippine gaming industry, we will export new markets, new products using this kind of technology, which we think will probably dominate this industry in the next 3 to 5 years. Again, I'd like to congratulate the organizers of SiGMA, and I believe that you're doing us a lot of service because you are now allowing us to access the information we need to make good decisions in this kind of activity. Thank you very much.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to SiGMA Roadshow Manila edition. To our viewers, thank you for taking the time to join us in today's panel. I'm very excited to be with three industry experts who have come together to discuss about the future outlook of the gaming industry in Asia, Europe, and the US, which suffered greatly during the height of the pandemic. Despite that, we are hoping that 2021 and beyond will prove to be normal. Moreover, our panelists today will be presenting very valuable information with regards to the necessary convergence for land-based casinos and online gaming operations moving forward. I will be pleased to introduce to you Alex Cohen, who is joining us from Spain. He is the CEO and co-founder of the European-based online gaming supplier, Calamba Games. Also, we have Tony Tong, who is joining us from Hong Kong. He's the co-chairman of Hong Kong Blockchain Association, and he is also the vice chairman of Macau Gaming Information Association, or MGIA. Last but not least, we're having Calvin Lim joining us in the panel. He is calling from Manila. He's the president and CEO of TFNN. So welcome, gentlemen. It's a great pleasure to have you all. Now, my first question is for you, Tony. Could you tell us about the current and near future outlook for Macau land-based gaming? Are we seeing more people from mainland China and Hong Kong heading back to Macau to play?
Well, as you know, because of the pandemic situation, Macau really took a very, very big hit. Every place was locked down, but gradually now Macau, as the COVID-19 is all in control, so Macau is getting ready to open up. So the visitors from China, especially in Guangdong province, the neighboring province, they are getting ready to enter Macau. Hong Kong is still suffering from the COVID-19, so Macau is not opening up to Hong Kong people yet. But I think more and more people are going to be vaccinated, and so there will be like a green health code once you're vaccinated, and then you have to get some certification. And I think within a few months, I think more and more people will be able to go to Macau from Hong Kong, Guangdong, and all over China. So I'm pretty confident that the visitors will return to Macau by the end of this year.
Thank you, Tony. And similar question goes to you, Alex, but more focused on Europe and online.
Well, in Europe, it varies one country to another, but in some of the larger gaming markets, casinos are still closed with no immediate plans to reopen them. So the online gaming industry has it's benefited from a shift in player habits that people who are looking for a gambling experience, they'll turn online. And I think it coincides that I think a lot of European countries were a little bit behind the curve in, say, Asia or in Northern Europe or in the US in terms of adoption of e-commerce. And COVID forced that people had to do a lot of habits where they were used to going downstairs and walking out the street. It forced them to pick that up online. And so there's been a greater adoption of say online habits than there had been prior to the pandemic. And we see that because a lot of the companies that have a land-based presence in Europe also have an online presence, they've taken their user base and then just tried to reach them online. So we've seen quite a big spike in gaming activity overall, but most of it has been online and mostly at the expense of land-based.
All right, thank you, Alex. Now I'd like to turn over to Calvin. How long do you see it taking for land-based casinos to get back on track with revenue and traffic flow?
Well, specifically for the Philippine markets, I think it's important for us to understand a little bit of the history the two main moving parts that we have is the circuit breakers, and of course, is the subsequent one is the inoculation. So fortunately, we have some form of data where the first wave of at the peak of the pandemic, where the government introduced a series of community quarantine measures, from no operation to limited capacity to age restrictions. I guess one can argue that it has been working because the cases went down. Again, from the first wave, middle of 2020, where there's 7,000 cases, to I think 3 months later, we're looking at a few hundred cases a day. And of course, it's correlated. The more stringent the quarantine measures are, the lesser reported cases. And of course, the more looser the quarantine measures are, the higher the case. And it took 7 months from the first wave to the second wave. And the second wave, the peak was about 2 weeks ago. The infection rate actually doubled from 7,000 on the first wave to 15,000 reported cases in a day. And to bring that down to 3-digit infection, I guess the safe assumption that it will take similar time frame, if not longer. So that puts us at about the end of third quarter, if not early fourth quarter of this year. So simultaneously, the inoculation, a bit of numbers, we have about 1 million first dose of vaccine. And the plan for the government is to have 70 million people vaccinated by end of this year. So that means 140 million vaccines. There was a tripartite deal between the government, private sector, led by Mr. Ricky Razon. Someone needs to give him a medal, and Moderna, to bring in 20 million vaccines. I'm actually proud to announce that DFNN was a part of this private sector group. When it comes to the whole vaccination process, unfortunately, we don't have enough data to understand like for example, the side effects of the vaccine. We have some form of reports elsewhere, for example, and the other examples are like a new strain being reported, and the logistic issues that in Philippines might face. So giving some form of allowance of the known unknowns and the unknown unknowns, I would say in order to achieve the target of 70 million people being vaccinated, we're looking at easily first quarter of 2022. Maybe you want to extend it a little bit further, second quarter of 2022. And if we think and feel that history is the best predictor for the future, it's basically a race of time, right? So it's either we reach herd immunity first or the third wave. So fingers crossed. And so I guess that's basically second quarter of 2022 is where we see land-based gets back on track. And hopefully the regulation for international travel will also be relaxed by then. The kicker to it is that Philippines elections will take place in May 2022. So that's going to be a very interesting 2 years or 24 months in the Philippines.
Yes, exactly. Well, fingers crossed indeed. Thank you, Calvin. Now, how are land-based casinos changing their approach to online gaming in Asia, Europe, and the US in response to COVID? And are these attitudes or approaches that are emerging and we're seeing temporary or permanent? Could we start with you, Alex?
Sure. Well, I think it varies a lot by geography, of course. I think that in the US, we've seen what was a bit more of a stagnant market in terms of, or stagnant regulatory environment that was stalemated for about 10 or 15 years, all of a sudden coming to life because a lot of state governments that had depended on tax revenue from land-based gaming all of a sudden found that that was not coming in. And it made some corporations that were dependent on land-based casinos but had been worried about cannibalization from online casinos a lot more receptive to online gaming overall. And it made a lot of state governments that had been, say, reluctant to adopt regulations that they didn't fully understand. They were more willing to approach that in the context where this tax revenue that they had been counting on suddenly dried up. So within the past year and a half, we've seen a number of states in the US start falling like dominoes to approve regulated online sports betting, and a number of them are following with online casino as well. We see that in Europe, there was a much greater cross-selling from companies that had land-based and an online presence. So, for example, in Italy, where casinos have been shut since March of last year, there was a large shift by the same companies that have their player base that they know from the land-based casinos. They just shifted them online, and companies that had that major online presence were able to keep their revenue pretty stable because of that. So we see that that's a bit of a trend in Europe, that a lot of land-based casinos that had not really adopted online gaming are turning to it out of a business need now. And we see that in Asia to some extent as well, that there are some casinos in Philippines that are turning to online gaming and approaching online gaming regulation because it's what they need to do in order to keep their business running.
All right, and how about for Asia, Tony? What are your thoughts?
I think overall, more and more people are playing games and other gaming online. But in Macau, because the regulation, the gaming law in Macau only allows land-based gaming. For online, there's only the Macau Jockey Club that has a monopoly. And same in Hong Kong, there's no other form of gambling that's legal other than Hong Kong Jockey Club. In China, likewise, there's only China Welfare Lottery and China Sports Lottery. In fact, Chinese government has stepped up its enforcement ban against online gambling. There's been a lot of arrests and freezing of accounts related to online gambling. So while the trend is definitely more and more players are moving online, but due to the regulatory issues, I think that it's hard to see official numbers because the biggest market is China, and China certainly has has stepped up its ban against online gambling. So I think all the operators that are targeting the mainland Chinese, have to be more careful.
All right, thank you. And Calvin, could you comment on the above?
Yeah, I think it's quite consistent as what Alex mentioned. Each country has own forms of transition and moving towards the online side of things. The trick to it, while delicately balancing the pandemic, is to have regulation, right? And of course, after regulation comes enforcement, and it's very difficult for the especially in the Philippines, specifically the regulators, to enforce like gray markets, for example, or offshore operators, as in offering their kinds of platform or games in Philippines. So Philippines, so in that aspect, it's basically a real challenge. But other than that, I think it's inevitable. The whole transition of or the whole focus of moving into the online side of things is here. It's the pandemic actually accelerated the whole need to digitalize a lot of different segments. However, moving forward after post-pandemic, I suppose, I strongly believe, and similar with around the world, both land-based and online is here to say this two ecosystems has coexisted for many years, and it will coexist because of the whole different, well, if you want to go through target market, the whole target market is different players, different kind of needs and mindsets altogether. So yeah.
All right, thank you for your insights. I'd like to move on now with the next question. Has the pandemic changed the balance of online versus land-based casinos and the player habits? Can we hear what Tony has to say first?
As I mentioned earlier, I think more and more games, sports betting, casual games, and online games are definitely coming up, and the younger generation are much more interested in all different forms of online gaming, including esports and casual games. And also with the bull market in the cryptocurrency, we're seeing more and more people are using new forms of payment that are involving cryptocurrencies. Bitcoin Casino, other tokens using Ethereum or USDT stable coins. We're seeing more and more games and gaming using cryptocurrency as payment. And I'm seeing also some new games are using the websites, gaming operators are using blockchain technology to validate the fairness of the game. So they're using a provable fair game, PFG technology, that's enabled by blockchain technology. So there's as people shift their plays from land-based to online, the biggest issue is how do you ensure the fairness of the game. And when you have a central authority, the players always are very suspicious of the central authority, the gaming operator, of playing tricks with the game. I know the Chinese players are very suspicious about that kind of cheating. So I know that there are new games coming out using a blockchain and provable fair game (PFG) technology to prove the fairness of the game, and I think that would, if that would allow the players to feel more comfortable, and they can move their plays online.
All right, thank you. And Calvin, what are your observations?
Well, one of the significant introduction at both what Tony and Alex mentioned in terms of introduction of a new game, and this is specifically very unique in the Philippines, but perhaps you might find this in other South American countries, is the legalization of an online version of cockfighting, or isabong. And that basically it's a very huge market. It's traditionally it's done in a arena, and now because of the lockdown, the pandemic, you're not able, the customers or the players are able to go to the arena itself. Everything is all shifted online. So that itself is a huge market, and that technology behind it itself is something to marvel and for. Again, for me, it's all about the regulation and enforcement, which is going to be very, very interesting and challenge. And again, a very delicate balance between juggling the safety and health concern of the pandemic, as well as to generate revenues for the regulator and the government.
All right, thank you. And Alice, could you add on to that?
Yeah, I think. I mean, I say this from more of a perspective in Europe, where there are some countries where e-commerce adoption was very low or relatively low before the pandemic. That, I mean, I have to think that the habits that people have adopted of doing things online that they weren't used to doing, going to see a doctor instead of physically going to make an appointment, people are getting more used to having a video call with a doctor, for example. I have to think that that sort of transition is something that's going to be permanent, that people will have adopted a bit more online lifestyle where they might not have done it before. I think for geographies like the US and in Asia, where online adoption was pretty high to begin with, I think it's more a matter of acceptability and trust in online gaming operators. And I think if you have an environment where everything is operating illicitly, then yeah, it doesn't really engender a lot of trust. But as there's more regulation passed, then it does build a lot more trust. It allows people to sign on and have a bit more confidence and trust that if the operator has been approved by the regulator, then they're probably legitimate.
All right, and Alex, I'd love for you to answer if the boom in blockchain had affected either online or offline going forward as we return to normal. Will it be a standard part of payment and moving money for casino play going forward too?
I don't know. I think there are two things that need to happen with blockchain in order to become a bit more standardized as payment. One is that I think the regular banking system probably has to adopt it as a regulated norm. Because we've seen in a lot of countries that have regulated online gambling that they require it to be done in a specific currency because they want to have some control over it. If they have control over the banking system, they want to have control over the deposits and withdrawals from a casino as well. So it presents a challenge there for the more stricter regulated markets to adopt blockchain into their environment. For more agile regulated environments, then I think it does become something that will form a piece of the puzzle. That you have a lot of online players who become more and more used to having a wallet in cryptocurrency and performing actions with that. And so they'll want to use that to go and play online.
All right, Calvin, what do you think about this?
Well, it's mostly depending on jurisdiction and the need to adopt blockchain as a form of. I'm coming from a form of payment, deposit and withdrawal. So while the less, I would say, unregulated jurisdiction where there is no form of online gaming. So yeah, perhaps there might be a need in terms of adopting blockchain and cryptocurrency. But whereas for the adaptation of cryptocurrency as a payment for online regulated by parkour, it's yes, I see a need, but it's very challenging because on one hand, it's regulated by parkour for the online side of gaming, and then on the other hand, when it comes to payment, it's regulated by the central bank. So it requires I would say, government agencies to work very closely. Yes, so that's basically it.
All right, thank you, Calvin. Now we'd love to hear what Tony has to say in response to that.
Well, in Macau, it's very strict. As I mentioned, the gaming law is still purely land-based. And in fact, we see one of the biggest gaming operators, junket operators, that starts with the sun. They've announced that they can only focus on land-based. They announced publicly that they're gonna dislink from any online gaming activities because of the Chinese central government's enforcement against ban against online gambling. So several of the gaming operators that are related to Macau, they have public announcement that they are only doing land-based and they are not going to do any online. But meanwhile, we have seen many other that are gray market. They are still expanding to Southeast Asia and the Philippines, Vietnam, Cambodia, and other Pacific islands. They have acquired gaming license in various jurisdictions, and they're offering online, and they're accepting various forms of cryptocurrencies as payments. So blockchain can be used to ensure the fairness of the game with the provable fair game technology. As far as payment, Chinese government is also rolling out its central bank digital currency called DCEP, DCEP, currently in trial in 4 cities in China, like Shenzhen and Chengdu, Hangzhou, and so on. And we believe that within a year, this will be rolled out to many different cities. And actually, also Hong Kong is going to be testing the central bank digital currency. So that's it. Yeah. So I think the Chinese government, they of course they're going to control the only official government approved payment is the DCEP, and the Chinese government does not allow other forms of cryptocurrency payments.
All right, thank you. And with regards to the new procedures that players are seeing happening or will happen as part of the new normal, besides face masks, chipless play, social distancing tables, vaccine passport requirements, are there any more besides these? Calvin, what do you think?
I think one area is perhaps a vaccine passport that allows, if the government allows, immigration allows, those that is vaccinated, and the passport is recognized by both countries to allow I would say, some forms of tourism that includes going to the casinos and so forth. Other than that, we have seen it all. Face mask, as you mentioned, chipless play, social distancing tables. You have tables where it is segregated by an acrylic and it's limited to 3 players per table. So I think the next thing will be the introduction of the vaccine passport.
And Alex, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I think it will be interesting to see what happens. I can see that in some jurisdictions, for example, the US, there's some states where there's quite a lot of aversion to the idea of a vaccine passport. Florida, for example, the governor said that they would never issue those. Then you have in Europe, where I think casinos are pretty far down the list as far as reopening priorities, but a lot of countries in Europe already do ID checks when you enter into a casino. So I think that it's not a huge extension to have, for example, a vaccine passport check as soon as you go to enter a casino.
And how about you, Tony? What do you think?
The travel bubble that's been in discussion by Hong Kong and Macau among the surrounding countries' jurisdictions, I think that's going on, and I think in a few months or before the end of this year, I think that's going to open up. So people, I think, will be able to travel within Asia. So I think that will be good for the land-based side. I think for online gaming, that is the big trend. People are spending more time online. They are working from home. They are also playing from home from their mobile phones and computers, and they are spending more time dealing with cryptocurrencies. That's like another big gaming market because it's very exciting. I know a lot of these high value players from China. They used to think online games, online baccarat slot machine was exciting. Now that they're betting millions of dollars on up and downs of Dogecoin and Bitcoin, that's even more exciting than going to Macau.
All right, and Tony, in your opinion, which region is or are far ahead from others in terms of normalcy, and can you give examples?
I think Macau will return to normalcy very quickly, I think within this year, and Chinese people, visitors will be traveling to Macau. And that's for the mass market. But for the high-end VIP market, it's still difficult for people to move money because the Chinese government has stepped up its monitoring on currency, foreign currency restriction, and the foreign currency control. So I think the number of visitors will go to Macau, and the mass market gaming in Macau will grow rapidly, but the VIP gaming will shrink in Macau.
And Calvin, what are your observations?
Well, I think in my answer to the earlier question, we're looking at normalcy about middle of 2022. As what Tony mentioned, if you're looking at the VIP customers, if there is a form of recognition to allow them in with a vaccine passport, or if not, some form of ID, then yeah. If not, then we're looking at least 2022, middle, if not third quarter next year.
And Alex, what do you think?
I think it will vary a lot by geography. I mean, if we're talking about Europe in particular, I think that, the vaccine rollout is much slower than had been anticipated. And I think we're still, I mean, for example, in Spain here, we're still in some lockdown where we can't move from one area around our city to another without justification. So I think to some extent this will become the new normal for some countries for the next few years, depending on what their rollout and their approach is. So I think as economies begin to adjust to having that environment, then it starts to seem a lot more regularized. And I think, for example, in countries in Europe where the same casino had a land-based presence and had an online presence, they might not be feeling as much pain to reopen their casinos because they're still able to gain the same revenue, get the same players, and retain them a bit better even by approaching them online.
All right, thank you. And Tony, when do you think we anticipate Macau and Singapore and the others not to require the 14 days quarantine?
Macau, I think, will be open up to the surrounding cities like Guangdong province without quarantine within about 2-3 months. As long as you have a health passport with a mobile code, you can enter Macau. without the 2 or 3 weeks of quarantine. But that's only open to the mainland Chinese. For Hong Kong, they will be based on the Hong Kong's overall number of cases, but I think will be gradually opened up. But for other countries, I think that it's going to be longer before they are allowed to go into Macau without quarantine.
All right, thank you. Can we hear the last say from Calvin?
Sorry?
Can we hear the last say from you? When do you think Macau, Singapore, and the others will not require anymore the 14 days quarantine, as this period can really discourage the casual players to travel to these destinations?
Yeah, I think the example I can give is like, for example, Taiwan. Do they not only require the 14-day quarantine, but they have a 7-day self-health management where you have to stay at home. If you leave your home, you need to wear your mask. And that is to ensure that they have zero domestic transmission, and they've managed it very well. I think any country who is able to achieve that zero transmission, then you'll see some form of movement here and there. Other than that, it's herd immunity. Vaccination gets rolled out, and once any jurisdiction or country achieves that, then yeah, we will see back the new normal back again. Yeah.
All right, thank you. Fantastic. Thank you so much, gentlemen. Unfortunately, we have exceeded our time, but nonetheless, this was a great opportunity to be able to sit down with you all. I hope this will be of resource to our audience. So thank you very much again for a great discussion, Alex, Tony, and Calvin. And to our viewers, thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next panel.
Thank you.
Thank you, Yanni. Thank you, Calvin and Alex.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much.
Calvin, I hope to see you in the Philippines.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this panel. I'm so pleased to be joined by two Asian gaming professionals who have come together to discuss about the Philippine inshore gaming operations, also known as PIGOs. And for context, PIGOs are for regulated online gambling for Filipino citizens. And we're here today to discuss PIGO's latest trends and regulations. And in addition, we will be unfolding some of the major trends as well as attitudes and regulations in online gaming in other Asian countries. So first up, we have Joe Pisano, who's calling from Manila. He's the founder and CEO of Jade Entertainment and Gaming Technologies. Founded in the Philippines in 2009, they are now the pan-Asian supplier of gaming technology and service provider. The Jade Group is involved on land-based product distribution, sports betting, and online operations, and they are the bridge between land-based and online gaming. Joe obtained his master's degree in business and technology at the University of New South Wales, Australia. He is an industry veteran with over 30 years of experience in global gaming technologies, which includes systems, slots, lotteries, bingo, and totalizators. And we also have Lauren Stout, who is currently based in Phnom Penh, Cambodia. He is the founder and CEO at Pixel Asia and Dragon Points Live. Lauren graduated with a degree in international business and minor in marketing from the University of Nevada, Reno. He has worked across multiple disciplines within the casino industry in both large and small companies. He has been an operator, salesperson, product manager, analyst, and a business owner in Asia. He works with his partners focusing on changing the game in Southeast Asia and beyond. So welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you, Yanni.
Pleasure to have you both. Now, could we start by having you tell us who currently has been approved for PIGO license in the country? I think, Joe, you can answer this.
Yeah, currently we know of 2 licenses that have been issued, one up in Subic and the DFNN group here in Manila. Both are going through product testing at the moment. We believe that product testing will go on for some time as we're still currently under quarantine conditions here in Manila. We are waiting on PAGCOR to make the regulations public, but we know of several operators here in the Philippines that want to enter into the PIGO market, and they're just looking at different avenues and different technologies at the moment to see how they enter that market.
All right, thank you, Joe. And with the state of the pandemic, as bad as it is, how successful do you anticipate the Pigo market to be? Lauren, could we start with you?
Sure. I think that metric is much weight to be seen. It's important that the regulator there has understood that revenues are down in land-based casinos, and to help is to look a little bit locally. I think the benefit here would be obviously regulating the potential black markets that might exist, and help localize the current online offerings for localized businesses.
And Joe, what's your take on this?
Well, we've over the past year, we've seen tremendous growth in the online industry, not only here in the Philippines, but internationally. And the Pigo concept is not something that's restricted to the Philippine market. PAGCOR have been the first regulator here in Asia to take the initiative to look at how to solve the problem of continuing business while we are in a pandemic. I believe whether it's during the pandemic or well after we get over our current problems, it'll be a great marketing tool for land-based casinos.
And Joe, have any of the land-based casinos pushed against Pigo legislation?
No, the land-based casinos say welcome it, and they see what we're doing here in Manila. Others from other jurisdictions have also been asking, how do we get in on this? How do we provide our customers with continuance while there is a pandemic? The players are registered to the property, whether they play on site or from another location. The properties see it only as a continuance of their business. And I'm sure Lauren, from his jurisdiction as well, I'm sure he's getting inquiries from the properties he services as well.
Absolutely. The convergence that we're seeing here just within our industry locally in Asia, but globally between online and land-based casinos is a natural step during a pandemic such as COVID. I think a lot of land-based operators understand that the potential and the opportunity is there in the online world, but they haven't had the ability nor the reason to go and pursue that. Now, I think with the understanding of the regulators, the understanding of the businesses and the shareholders and the stakeholders within land-based casinos, I think that the convergence question is certainly more of a positive answer rather than it was before the pandemic.
And Lauren, what does Pigo for Live slots look like, and how can land-based properties extend machines on the floor to online play?
Well, I think, if you look at the online offerings that we've had traditionally with live table games throughout our markets here in Asia, it's been very well serviced in a fairly competitive market. Now, something about a land-based casino is, particularly in the Philippines and Cambodia, the slot machine play and the revenue that the land-based casinos make from that avenue is quite substantial in terms of gross revenue for the property. So it's an underserviced market in terms of offering those machines to existing players, like Joe pointed out. We have players that are registered to the property that the properties still want to service, yet they're unable to do so because the technology is not there or relatively new. So what this opportunity provides for companies like Dragon Points Live is really the ability to answer a question for land-based casinos in order to give them the ability to provide those land-based slot machines to their customers and to utilize the existing capital that they have on their floors that they might be paying for still in order to generate revenue. So there's a lot of positives, a lot of opportunity from a slot machine standpoint, and also the integrity of a land-based slot machine as well. If a player understands, particularly a land-based player who is playing a land-based machine, they understand that that machine is there and it has the integrity of being in a licensed casino in a licensed jurisdiction. So they're far more comfortable to make the jump from a land-based play to an online play as well.
Interesting. So can players deposit and withdraw at land-based casinos who have the PGO license? Joe, do you know anything about this?
Yes. Well, the whether it's slots or live tables or any online product, the player registers at the property. So the player can either register at the property or can also register via video to the property's call center. There is a process to take their identification, make sure that they're who they say they are, they're the right age bracket. So all that is done first. Deposits can be made either at the property or online. Here in the Philippines, we have things like GCash, Peso Pays, a number of online payment products that can be used for deposits and withdrawals. And these are all available to the online player. And, most jurisdictions would have the same type of online payment type gateways that could be used.
All right, and being the first real online gambling regulation for Asia, how big of a milestone is this? We want to hear your thoughts. Can you go, Lauren, first?
I think it's massive. Just outside of what we have in Europe and other jurisdictions around the world, it's really the only place in Asia where we do have online jurisdiction and regulation. And, it's also becoming a benchmark for other countries around the region that might want to start doing this sort of stuff and answering their tax problems as well with legalizing and regulating online gaming. I think that it's what PAGCOR in Philippines has done up until this point has been quite good. And I know for a fact that other countries are looking at their regulation and considering how they'll handle it going forward.
And Joe, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, this is a massive milestone for the industry. PAGCOR has shown the initiative to do what a lot of other jurisdictions have wanted to do for quite some time. We work across a lot of jurisdictions, and we are getting inquiries from other governments asking, how is PAGCOR going about this? What are operators doing in your region? How can we go online, within and this is from Central Asia, the Middle East, other regulated jurisdictions that have never looked at online, now wanting to take their online or their land-based casinos and it's, PAGCOR's taken a step to bridge the gap here between land-based and online. And I think it'll only be a good thing for the industry.
Those are music to my ears. And Joe, will B2B providers need to have licenses, or what special regulation do they have to go through?
Most definitely. We're working within licensed jurisdictions. So, the same probate and regulation that applies to a land-based casino and people working in a land-based casino. So licensing of individuals, licensing of service providers, certification of products. These are a must. We can't we can't hand over land-based gaming to a grey market. It has to be well regulated, and PAGCOR has put the regulations in place and the certifications in place to take care of this.
All right, I'd love to hear what Lauren has to say in response to that.
Yeah, I think with land-based casinos putting the amount of capital and the amount of investment they have, it's important. I think the licenses and everything and the regulation that comes with it is something that land-based casinos are quite familiar with. And to provide that product that has the integrity and kind of the third set of eyes that are looking at it through a regulator actually helps the customer as well. So absolutely, I think that regulation and licensing from not only operators but suppliers and people of that nature is a must.
Thank you very much. And we've uncovered the regulatory environment in the Philippine market. Now I'd like to move on to discuss other Asian jurisdictions. Could we start with Cambodia? Lauren, with you being the expert in Cambodia, China continues to crack down on gambling online and offline, and Cambodia is no exception. Rumors have it that there are still online gambling companies in cities such as Sihanoukville. Now, how does this mean that regulated online gambling will come back to Cambodia after being shut down a year and a half years ago, in part by China?
Well, I think, the casino industry in Cambodia is a fairly large industry, locally. I think that the local government had seen the potential of a jurisdiction that is regulated with online, with the very large growth that we had in Sihanoukville from 2017 to 19. I think that it would be only smart to look at doing some sort of regulation similar to what the Philippines and PAGCOR have done in order to spur that sort of much needed development in a city such as Sihanoukville and around the region. There are at least $40 billion worth of investment that are placed into this country in casinos and resorts and IR type projects that are still ongoing at the moment. I think it'd be only natural to assume that online gaming would be some part of their revenue, and the regulation would need to be in place for these sorts of companies to continue with the development of this sort of project. So I think it all bodes well for regulation of that sense. I think it would be great for the government to do so. I think that they understand the opportunity that is in front of them with doing so. So yeah, I think it's a matter of time, and the local government wants and needs that sort of development in being a developing country such as Cambodia.
All right, and many online operators and sites were located within land-based casinos. Is this still going on, and will China allow this to happen, knowing the influence they carry with Cambodia?
Well, I think that, obviously the pandemic has challenges for every business, including Cambodia. There's been a lot of investment in this country since 2017 in the casino sector, not only from China, but also from other places like Malaysia, Indonesia, Thailand, Vietnam. Those borders were just as booming as Sihanoukville. So there's a lot of investment along those lines. I think that the jobs aspect that the online operations provide is also good for the local authorities and the legacy type owners that we've had in Cambodia, who have been here for more than 30 years, some of them. So they definitely have the commitment, and they've shown the commitment to Cambodia in order to proceed with their business and see how it goes.
Thank you very much, Lauren. Now I'd like to turn over to Joe and discuss India. Now, outside of rummy and online poker, how has the growth of online gambling been with relationship to sports betting and casino?
Well, for sports betting, this week the IPL started, which is their cricket league. So for the next 6 or so weeks, sports betting and cricket betting will be huge in India. Several jurisdictions now throughout India are looking at regulating online sports betting, online casino, and also virtual sports as well as esports. And this goes for the Indian market and Sri Lanka and also Nepal. So if we look at those three countries as a bubble, Nepal has moved forward now. Nepal has only last week endorsed the first online provider, and that provider should go live within 60 days. Sri Lanka is setting up a Dubai type zone, which will allow gaming, and they'll be looking at regulating online and licensing, possibly within the next year. So we will see new online jurisdictions, and we will see the growth in these three areas, both land-based and online.
All right, and will India regulate online gambling anytime soon, state by state or national federal? And will regulated online gambling be tied to land-based casinos in GOA?
I think it'll be state by state. I don't think it'll be tied to land-based casinos. We will see areas like Pondicherry that may regulate land-based. We may see areas like Chennai that will regulate esports, and we will see places like Goa, Sikkim that will allow their their land-based properties to offer online. So there'll be a variety of models throughout the country. I think the most important thing there, once they do start going state by state, will be, geofencing will become very important. AML controls there will become very important. Player registration and identification will become very important. So with what's happening in China and the blocking of online and land-based out of China, India will possibly be the most important market within the region moving forward.
Wow, all right. And Joe, you mentioned Nepal a while ago. Let's discuss Nepal. It seems that Nepal is growing with offline casinos, housing about 6 casinos now. And what is the offline gambling situation on regulation? Will land-based casinos grow going forward and possibly expand beyond just tourists?
There are your land-based casinos. There are your what they call e-casinos with slots only, mostly along the Indian border. We will see some new properties, land-based properties in India. We will see online tied to some of the e-casinos, and we will see online licensing, and that's already happening now. So we'll see the first online site within 60 days.
All right. And would things like regulated live dealer operations be based inside the legal land-based casinos? And a follow-up question, will those casinos be the first to get online licenses?
Live dealer within properties. Now, live dealer within properties will happen here in the Philippines under PIGO. You can utilize your existing tables. So basically, you're expanding your existing tables on property to the online market. And that can happen whether it's here in the Philippines or in Nepal or in Cambodia. The technology is available. The cross-marketing upstream and downstream is also available. The The technology which is used in live studios, we have several here in Makati, is basically the same technology that's used on the floor. Now, it's not just going out into the general public, but expanding play on the casino floor into safe zones on the casino floor. At the moment, we don't have things like theaters, restaurants, lounges, and this is both for slots and tables. Players want to be in a safe zone, so rather than sit at 5 at a table, they could move away from the table into a safe zone, which may be a lounge, previously a lounge, and sit there and play a machine or a table from a safe zone within. So when we say online, it may not be all the way outside the property. It could be within the property itself.
We get a lot of requests like that in order to provide both solutions, whether it's online, but also localized through a LAN, LAN network where they can set up zones to do that. Because, some guy might be on your favorite machine or next to it, and you want to keep the safe distance. So you find the place to go do that.
All right. Fantastic. Thank you so much, Joe and Lauren, for a great discussion. Unfortunately, that is all the time we have, but we appreciate the valuable insights the both of you gentlemen have shared with us today. So thank you so much. And to our viewers, thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you for the next panel.
Thank you, Yanni, and thank you to SiGMA.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
Hello, and thank you very much for staying with us today at SiGMA Roadshow Manila. We had a great first hour with Alex Cohen, Tony Tong, and Calvin Lim for the 2021 and Beyond Getting Back to Normal panel, and also with Joe Pisano and Lauren Stout for the PIGO's latest regulation and trends panel. Now, coming up after the break, we will have Mario Ocharov, CEO at Ultraplay, who will be delivering a keynote on esports. And for the last panel for today, we will have Oladad Tosh and Vitaly Umansky, who will be discussing Asia Gaming in 2030. So once again, thank you very much to our sponsors and to our viewers. Thank you very much for tuning in. And with that, let's get back to the show. Hello and welcome to SiGMA Roadshow Manila edition. In our panel today, we'll be taking a look at what's beyond the pandemic. We're going to go way past till the end of the decade, discussing Asia Gaming in 2030, where we'll be covering key Asian jurisdictions. We're joined today by two experts in gaming. First up, we have Vitaly Umansky, who's calling from Hong Kong. He's a senior analyst at Bernstein Research covering global gaming. He has prior experience as CFO in Studio City in Macau. And of course, we have Oladad Tosh, who is joining us from Macau. He is the managing director of 28 Limited. He has held senior level positions with gaming companies in Las Vegas and Macau. So welcome, gentlemen.
Hi, Yanni. How are you?
Hi,
I'm
Yanni.
very good, thank you. How are you guys?
Great.
Good.
All right, so let's discuss the Asian gaming landscape in the year 2030. Far enough to not be affected with today's environment, but not too far as to be too remote. So, Oladad, could you please set up key underlying assumptions you and Vitaly would be basing your projections on?
Yeah, Vitaly and I discussed this when we saw the topic 2030 in Asia. So we kind of, it actually made life a lot easier because we don't have to talk about the pandemic. Obviously, by 2030, the pandemic would be hopefully a distant memory. So its effect, whether it's next year, the following year, is not going to be a matter that's of any issue. We're also assuming that within the multiple jurisdictions in Asia, there will not be any political changes or any changes in appetite as far as the government and gaming. So suddenly the government of Korea is not going to go against gaming or anything else. And we also further assume that as it is now, contrary to the rumor that pops up every once in a while, Macau will be the only place where gaming is allowed in China. In other words, if China suddenly allows gaming in Hainan or other jurisdictions, it will totally upset everything else. But as it stands right now, we're of the belief, along with most other people, that China will keep Macau and have its monopoly going for the next few years.
All right, thank you, Alidad. Now let's go through the gaming jurisdictions one by one. Vitali, what's your take on Macau?
Sure. So, I've always been a big believer that Macau is a build it and they will come story. So as long as Macau continues to develop new integrated resorts, new features, as long as the border remains open, I think the growth prospects in Macau on the mass side of the business look exceptionally strong. We're forecasting that the Macau market should be able to grow on the mass side somewhere around kind of high single digits, 10+% year over year, kind of beginning in 2022, once we get through the pandemic. And I think that's sustainable as long as we do have some supply expansion. I think we do have that evidence in some of the new projects that will be coming online for the next couple of years. The key question is, once we get beyond 2024, 2025, will we still have new developments coming online in Macau? I think the answer is yes, and I think that leads to pretty robust growth dynamics in the mass market for all of Macau.
And what about VIP?
So VIP is a completely different animal. We've seen a significant crackdown by the Chinese authorities on effectively junket-related business within mainland China. We do not believe that business comes back in any shape or form the way it had been in the past. We go back to 2013, 2014, VIP was generating roughly $33 billion of US dollars of GGR. Those numbers came crashing down during the anti-corruption campaign, saw a little bit of recovery in 17 and 18, and then started trending down again in 19. While we don't think VIP disappears completely, we do think that junket industry will remain under significant pressure and will not revert back to even 2019 levels. We'll be lucky if we get back to kind of 2015, 2016 levels. But in the end, it doesn't really matter for Macau. We think that the profitability aspects of mass and then the coming non-gaming will be so much stronger than VIP, and that's been the case already, that VIP just becomes less and less important over time.
And Alidad, what do you think about Macau?
Vitaly and I talk so much about Macau. We have very similar thinking. There's a couple of points I want to make here. I agree with them that mass is going to be the key driver going forward, but I doubt whether or not there will be additional supply given. We know that multiple of the 6 gaming companies, there'll be a brand new addition to Cotai within the next few months. There'll be phase 2s at Wynn, at Studio City, at MGM. There will be phase 3 and 4 at Galaxy. But once these projects run out, I'm not quite certain whether or not the government's going to figure out a location within Macau to equitably allocate enough of a land to these individual 6 gaming companies to go ahead and do this, or perhaps bring a 7th one. So I think Vitaly's double-digit growth or low double digits growth for the next 4 or 5 years is very reasonable. What remains to be seen is what happens afterwards. As far as VIP, I've been pretty negative on VIP for quite some time. I think 2019's $14 billion in gaming revenue, which is half what it was back in the 13-14. That was something we're not going to see for quite some time. I think VIP, even when it recovers fully, I think it will be something around half as much, maybe 7 to 10 billion, if they're lucky. The shift will definitely be into mass gaming, which includes premium mass, it includes grind mass, and it will also include a lot more emphasis on the non-gaming element, which is what the government has been harping on for quite some time.
And just to add one thing, VIP, I think one of the key questions around VIP is not really what VIP will wind up being, because nobody really knows. We don't really know what it's going to be. We know that the economics for the casino industry of the VIP segment, junket segment, are fairly weak to begin with in terms of profitability. The question, I think, is how many of those VIP players eventually wind up coming back to Macau as premium players, mass players, premium direct players, where margins are better, where casinos have direct interface with the customer. And while the dollar amount may be lower from each of those players than it was with a junket system, the profitability may well be as good, if not better, in terms of dollars of EBITDA per visit. So I think that's what we'll see, I think, happening over time as the junket system continues to be disintermediated and exposed to significant pressure from regulators and law enforcement officials in China itself.
But that is one of the challenges with the junket world, in that they actually act as ways to bring some money on board, even for the premium mass. So from a player standpoint, whether he plays in a junket or premium mass, okay, we can argue that back and forth whether or not there's some transferability. But if junkets get severely weakened when it comes to the ability to bring money on board, how would that premium mass guy, the suddenly new premium mass guy, be able to bring in a few $1 million? And that's actually one of the challenges we're going to have on the VIP. But the other thing that I guess everybody's talking about is what's happening with the licenses. That's, I think, the government's going to emphasize even more non-gaming, whether or not that's fair or not. And I think that's going to be a challenge. If they use that 50% number yet again, which is what Las Vegas creates, $6 billion in gaming revenue, $6 billion in non-gaming revenue. There's just no way in the world Macau's 36 billion revenue and hopefully 40 and 45 billion will ever be, anything close to it in the non-gaming world. And even with the addition of the additional hotel rooms and restaurants and everything else that's going to come online, it will be a tiny fraction of the gaming, despite what the government wants and even the operators are dying to produce. It just is not going to go and generate much.
All right, so we've touched upon the junkets, VIP, mass gaming. How about non-gaming?
Yeah, so Vitaly, anything to add?
Yeah, so you talked about it. I think that's actually the right assessment. I think non-gaming will over time get slightly bigger. Again, especially if we add more projects, that's the case. But if you think about Las Vegas and Macau, the comparison, it's just a flawed comparison. And I know a lot of people like to make it, as well as I do, right? I mean, if you look at the United States, the Las Vegas Strip represents 8% of gaming revenues in the United States, right? The difference is so stark. Macau is a funnel for gaming demand coming out of Greater China. Las Vegas is a destination that people go to be entertained, to go to convention, and some hardcore casino customers. But most casino customers can gamble at home. They can gamble in the casino that's 20 miles away from their house. They don't need to go to Vegas particularly to gamble. Macau is a very different animal. So that's a key difference. The second difference is that Las Vegas has over 150,000 hotel rooms. 20% of its visitation is really driven by convention business. Without having that type of critical mass, that type of scale, you just can't have the non-gaming revenues of sufficient size, right? Las Vegas gets 60 million overnight visitors a year. Once you get those numbers, if you could even do it in Macau, and I don't think the physical plant allows it, you can start getting more reasonable non-gaming numbers. But without that development, it's going to be extraordinarily hard. So you have the very large gaming revenue per visitor, and you have the non-gaming space, which is still relatively small, and the numbers of people are still relatively small. Non-gaming becomes difficult. But I do think non-gaming is critically important for driving mass business, especially grind mass-based mass business, because people need something to do, especially if you want more overnight visitors. You can't just have them gambling for 8 hours a day. That's not realistic. So you need more retail. You definitely need hotel rooms for them to stay in. You're going to need some forms of entertainment. I don't think it's going to be 3-hour shows like we have in Las Vegas, but there'll be other things for people to do. And I think that's the future that we're going to see in Macau.
All right, Alidad, let's have you take the first crack at Japan. What are your projections for Japan at the beginning of the next decade?
I hope that my projections for Japan are not going to be different than the one last decade, because everybody thought Tokyo Olympics would happen in 2020, and the casino in Tokyo would have already arrived, delivered sometimes in 19 and 20. But Japan has actually surprisingly made significant moves over the last few months after the, hurry up and wait. We're in one of those hurry up modes. And I think within the next few years, Japan will finally allow the 3 casinos to come online. Whether it's going to be 2 or 3, at least 2 will come online by the end of the year, by the end of this decade. And I believe that I'm a big bull on Japan, and I think it will be quite spectacular. As long as they choose one, perhaps two major metropolitan areas like Osaka and Tokyo, Osaka and Yokohama. I think Japan will be something. This will be the next wave, and it will actually force all the other jurisdictions, Singapore, Macau, Korea, to take notice and up their game, because I think it will just be very, very much advanced technologically. And revenue-wise, I think I've always been very much pro-Japan, so I think we'll do quite well.
All right, thank you. And Vitaly, what do you forecast for Japan?
Look, I think, there's a lot of question marks around Japan in terms of its regulatory regime and what the GGR outcome is going to be. A lot is really going to depend on what winds up getting built, right? If we have one property in Osaka and a property in Nagasaki, that's a very different market than if we have a $10 billion property in Osaka and a $10 billion property in Yokohama. So the numbers are going to be quite different. I think if you're building something of scale, like a Marina Bay Sands type property in Osaka or in Yokohama, you will deliver revenue numbers that are probably going to be a little bit better than Marina Bay Sands does, right? But in the end, you're only building 3 large-scale properties, maybe 2. You have severe restrictions on locals. You have the question mark around the Chinese gambler being able to gamble overseas in sufficient dollar amounts. We don't know what that's going to look like come 2026, 2027, when these properties are up and running. If there's an ease and an ability to just come from China into Japan with large wallets and gamble, that would be helpful. If there isn't, then it's going to be a much smaller market than I think people are assuming. The other thing, in my perspective, is everyone focuses on this pachinko industry and how large it is. And my perspective on this is that the pachinko industry, while it's indicative of gambling behavior for a certain subset of people, these are not necessarily the people that are going to be coming to the casinos. They're playing very different games, different dollar amounts. There's no entry levels of pachinko. So I think this market will be good. It really depends on what winds up getting built and what the regulatory regime winds up looking like, both in Japan and in China. But I think it'll be interesting to see what happens. My biggest concern on Japan is what profitability is going to look like, not necessarily what the top line looks like.
And what do you forecast for Manila and the Philippines overall? Vitaly, could you start with this one?
Yeah, so I think the Philippines may be getting a little bit saturated. We have a lot of projects in development. We have Cebu, we have another property in Manila. Again, a lot is going to depend on the Chinese regulatory regime around whether mainland Chinese customers will be able to come and play overseas. Right now, the direction that the Chinese government is headed, pretty draconian, very difficult to do. If this stays in place, places like Manila and other ASEAN and other Asian jurisdictions will suffer the consequences. But I think the Philippines has one advantage versus some of the other markets around Asia, which is I think it has a fairly robust local market. And as long as the Philippines economy continues to grow, and hopefully it'll come out of this pandemic at some point soon and kind of revert back to being a strong growth economy, I think the growing middle class, I think, will help dramatically with that market. But I do have concerns around saturation and how many properties will be opening up over the next couple of years, assuming they all get built.
All right, and Aladad, what do you have to say in response to that?
I think Vitaly is correct about the locals market. It has a very healthy locals market in Manila. I think that right now the entertainment city contains 3 properties. Having the additional 2 come online within the next few years is actually a plus, and it may assist what Vitaly earlier mentioned or referred to, which is whether or not China is going to be very pro or anti sending its players to overseas. That is something that has yet to be clarified. We are not quite sure what this blacklist that China has hinted at, whether or not it contains the current existing casinos. Is Manila one of them? Is Cambodia one of them? Is Japan going to be one of them? That is some kind of a gray area that has to be clarified. But the good news is I think that those 2 additional ones will, the additional properties coming online in entertainment cities, these are going to be pretty big properties. I think they're going to have a cluster effect in entertainment city, and that's going to make it a little bit more attractive. So I think Manila will continue to vie for in a pretty good spot in Asia in terms of ranking.
All right, and Aldad, would you like to kick off with Korea? What do you forecast about Korea?
Korea is a challenge. There's a couple of, one of them opened up a couple months ago. Dream Tower opened. The license will open relatively soon in Jeju. I think it's going to have some challenges just because it's located in Jeju, which is difficult to get to. There's a couple of properties that are going to be building, that are going to be built in Incheon, which is very close to Seoul, right next to the airport. Whether or not they're going to be successful, they're handicapped because the government of Korea, with the exception of one remote area, is not allowing local gaming. And exactly the opposite of Philippines, which the local gaming will help it sustain itself. Not having local gaming is going to be pretty challenging. With Japan coming, opening up gorgeous properties, it would just be such a simple hop on a plane and go and be in Japan gambling. I think it's going to take some time before the Korean government is going to recognize, hey, this just cannot happen. Let's tax it at least. So instead of these people losing their shirt in Japan, at least we'll be able to get some of the money back in terms of taxes. So I don't see very good news for individual IRs will do good, but collectively the overall market's not going to do that much better.
All right, and Vitaly, I'd love to hear what you have to add to that.
Yeah, look, I think Korea is a disaster. I think the government doesn't really know what they want to do. They've been very clear that locals is a non-starter outside of the local casino they have. If that mentality doesn't change, I think these large-scale integrated resorts that are being built now are going to be disasters waiting to happen in terms of profitability and return on investment. These types of assets cannot survive dependent on foreign gamblers, irrespective of what foreign nations do with allowing or not allowing their customers to come. Even if China allowed all their customers to go and gamble and junkets can go and do whatever you want, you're not going to be able to make the returns in large-scale, multi-billion-dollar casinos that are just geared towards foreign gamblers. It's just not going to work. Even when you think about Singapore, which I think maybe we'll get to, but Singapore has a very large, robust local market. And without that market, the return on investment there would be awful. So you need to have the local environment. Macau does so well for the sole reason that it has Guangdong and Hong Kong right next to it. That's the local market. Without it, Macau would be a very different animal. And every time governments look around and say, we're going to rely on foreigners and we're going to require multi-billion-dollar developments, it just never works.
I think one more thing to add in Korea is that the size of the infrastructure, I mean, how are you going to compete with a $4 up to $10 billion property in Tokyo or in Osaka? It's just very difficult for someone to want to risk their neck and go and gather this stuff and make it spectacular and just rely on foreigners. I just think that's one of the challenges that Korea is going to face.
All right, interesting perspectives about Korea. Now, we move on to Singapore. The country has only issued 2 gambling licenses, with both properties operating since 2010. Do any of you foresee any changes with regards to this? Vitaly, could you start with you?
Sure. Look, I like the Singapore market. It's low growth, right? It's been low growth for a while. The properties, especially Marina Bay Sands, are capacity constrained. Marina Bay Sands prior to the pandemic was running at 99% occupancy for its 20 rooms at very, very high ADRs. And they need more capacity. And I think by getting more capacity, they'll be able to incrementally drive revenues, both non-gaming and gaming, in that property. And I think Genting will be able to do the same thing, maybe not execute as well as Marina Bay Sands, in my view, but they'll be able to grow the market because Singapore in itself is a destination. And with the expansion that both Genting and Sands are planning for Singapore, by the time we get to 2025, 2026, these properties will be larger. There'll be new, fresh properties, features. Singapore, as I said, is a destination market, not just for Southeast Asia, but for Greater Asia and further into the Middle East, et cetera. So I think Singapore remains a critical market. And the fact that they do have a duopoly, it's a protected market. They don't have to worry as much about new competition coming online versus a market like Philippines, for example, which is a free-for-all. So I think that market will grow, but I think it needs the capacity expansion, which both operators are going to be putting in.
And Alidad, what's your take on Singapore?
I think Vitaly is correct. There will be low growth. Singapore since 2010 has been wonderfully boring and predictable, which is what the government has always wanted. I think once the new supply and the new hotels and restaurants and malls and everything else that's going to be added over the next few years for both properties are going to be built, there'll be a nice little uptick in volume, and then it will go back to the 99% occupancy, and they'll be predictably doing better than they currently are, and they will continue doing so over the long run.
All right. And how about Vietnam? Vitaly, would you like to start?
Sure. Look, Vietnam has been something that I think many operators have looked at in terms of trying to penetrate that market or enter the market for well over a decade. I remember back in New Cotai, we were looking at building a large scale property in Da Nang. We were looking at doing something up in the north part of the country. We never pulled the trigger, largely because the regulatory environment just never worked for us. Obviously, there's been some newer developments in Vietnam, but the problem you have in Vietnam, the continued problem you have in Vietnam, is that the government, I think, has very unrealistic expectations around what needs to get built versus what they're putting on the table in terms of regulatory environment. So, you look at properties that have been built, whether it's Ho Tram, whether it's Hoi An, which is kind of partially opened up, they're going to have significant problems without having a local market. Again, it goes back to the same issue that we discussed around Korea, which is without a local market, a multi-billion-dollar integrated resort doesn't work, right? You can get away with $100 million property or $150 million property if you can target foreigners, and it's easy to get there. And the tax situation looks good and the regulatory environment is loose, then it works. But if you don't have those things and you have a multi-billion-dollar property without a local market, there's no way it works. So I don't know what's going to happen in Vietnam. I'm not very optimistic that the government is going to change its regulatory environment in such a way that it allows large-scale, highly qualified operators and developers to come in and do what they're doing. And I think Hoi An is going to be a bit of a test on kind of what winds up happening.
Okay,
I
point
think,
taken. How about
I
Alida?
think geographically, Hoi An is suffering from the fact that Macau in the north and Singapore in the south is going to take care of everything that's going to happen in Southeast Asia. And also with the crackdown on VIP, there's just going to be very few people from China willing to go all the way down to Vietnam to get an experience that's not even the real Macau. So I think they're going to have challenges like Vitaly said.
Yeah, and just one thing to add, I forgot to mention this. I'm not a believer at all that beach casinos work, right? They haven't worked anywhere. I mean, Atlantis in the Bahamas, you can argue maybe, but even that is mostly non-gaming. People don't go to beach resorts, 5-star luxury beach resorts, and then want to sit in a baccarat table for 8 hours gambling. That's not why they're going to those types of locations. So any customer that actually wants that experience doesn't need to go to a beach resort. They can go to a Four Seasons, they can go to Ritz-Carlton, they can go to Mon Resorts. They don't need to go to a casino resort that's kind of located in maybe not the best location in order to have that. If they want to gamble, they'll go to a gambling property. If they want a resort vacation holiday, that's where they'll go. And I think the two just have never worked well together.
Agree.
And could the both of you give your projections for Cambodia and Thailand? What do you forecast about these jurisdictions?
Cambodia is going to be, with Sihanoukville and the departure on the anti-VIP and online gambling crackdown, I think it's going to be a very big challenge in Cambodia as far as any new players in the market. As far as Thailand, however, that's been the fantasy location, probably the most talked about jurisdiction that has yet to have casino after Japan. And a lot of places, and this is the environment where it is much more likely now than 10 years ago with the former king to potentially have gaming. If an integrated resort does work in Thailand, I think the combination of hospitality, beauty, food, the familiarity of everybody else with Thai and culture, I think it will be a fantastic addition to Asian gaming. It will offer something new. But I don't think Myanmar and Vietnam and Malaysia or all these other locations are going to be anything that are going to be matched by Singapore and Macau as far as the south part of Asia is concerned.
And Vitaly, anything you'd like to add?
No, just on Cambodia. I think Naga, with the monopoly position it has in Phnom Penh, I think will continue to do well. I think one of the questions is around again, going back to China and whether they'll allow people to come and gamble. If that kind of remains in force, and there is kind of a good relationship between China and Cambodia from a government to government perspective, so that may happen. Naga, I think, is well positioned with a very low tax rate, with a decent local business. So I think that that should continue to do okay. Thailand, it's a question mark. There's obviously no gaming there now. If Thailand decides to go down the path of Vietnam or Korea, then it's going to be a disaster, right? They're just not going to be able to do the right thing. If they go for full-fledged gambling with locals, that market could be very, very interesting, and it'll actually hurt, I think, if that were to happen, it would actually hurt markets like Cambodia and like Vietnam, where you do have players coming into those areas from Thailand. But that would be the impact. But I agree. I think whatever they build, it's not going to match up with Singapore and Macau, and those are going to be the two dominant animals until Japan comes online, which will then join kind of that triumvirate.
All right, thank you very much. Now we're down to our final question, gentlemen. What about online gaming by the end of this decade? What are your thoughts? Vitaly, would you like to start?
Yeah, I guess online gaming with the pandemic is getting a lot more interest. Obviously, there's many out there that are arguing you have to have online gaming because that's the future. I don't think many of the governments around Asia are willing to allow legalized online gaming for its own people. I think people are happy having, set up online gaming, get the revenues from other countries, which is kind of what Philippines does, although they have started a little bit with locals. That model just is not going to work in the long run. So I think China, I don't think goes down the path of legalizing online. Neither does Korea, neither does Japan. Your big markets are not going to do it, I don't think, anytime in the foreseeable future. So consequently, I think it's going to be largely a discussion topic. People are talking about, well, Macau should legalize online gaming. I don't know who the customer is because China is not going to allow it. So I think in the end, it's a lot of talk and really not much is going to happen on that front.
And Alidad, yes?
Not much to add. I agree. I think China has no appetite for online gaming for the long run, and that's the 800-pound gorilla. Without China, nothing's going to happen.
And so, in your opinion, how would you rank the markets by the end of the decade? Alidad, let's start with you.
Gaming markets, in terms of gaming revenue, if that's what you mean, had there not been a pandemic, by now we would have had, and I'm talking about, let's talk about markets. I'm not talking about US as a single market because it's so huge. We're talking about Las Vegas, perhaps, Macau, something geographically contained. Macau is number one, Las Vegas, Manila, Entertainment City, and Singapore would have been vying for number two. By the end of the decade, with some of the changes and everything that's going to happen over the next few years kind of having been resolved, I think the Macau will retain its position. It's so far ahead of everybody else that unless something disastrous happens, like China completely makes it illegal to gamble, which is not likely, Macau will be number one. I think Philippines, I think Manila and Entertainment City with its 5 integrated resorts will be a solid number two. When it comes to Japan, we're not counting Japan as one market, but we're counting individual locations. It is very possible that in Osaka or Tokyo or Yokohama by itself will be as large as Entertainment City. But that's going to be a things having to be very, very rosy because by the end of the decade, things would not have had enough time to mature. But I think Entertainment City would be number two, followed closely by one of the larger Japan cities, Singapore, and perhaps Las Vegas worldwide.
And Vitaly, what's your take on this?
Yeah, I think it's about I think that's probably about right. I think the key question is just on Japan and what they wind up doing, and how big Entertainment City, kind of, if that's one location, can actually become. I think there's going to be more cannibalization in Entertainment City than Alidad does. But I think in the end, that's probably what it looks like. And I think Singapore, depending on how strong this expansion is going to be in terms of how much business it drives in, that could put Singapore over the top above Entertainment City. But I think Macau by far is going to be the number one GGR destination in the world with no clear second, nowhere remotely close to them.
Fantastic. Sounds like the future looks bright for Asia indeed. Well, thank you, Alidad and Vitaly. Indeed, the both of you have put together interesting, thought-provoking predictions about the gaming industry that in the 8 markets that we have covered today. So thank you for taking the time to share your insights with us this afternoon and for this riveting discussion.
Thank you very much, Yanni. Take care, Vitaly.
Thanks, Yanni. Good seeing you.
Hello everyone, my name is Mario Ovcharov. I'm the CEO of Ultraplay, and I'm happy to participate in a short video that will help you to understand how to establish a profitable esports betting brand, and that we have the opportunity given from SiGMA Roadshow Manila to make that happen. So a little bit about us. Ultraplay has been in esports since 2014. We are one of the early adopters of the esports betting as we see it right now. Back then, we decided that esports needs to have proper coverage, needs to have proper live betting. So we took that road, and here we are 7 years after. We have won over 25 international awards. We have a big team of traders, and our product is one of the most recognized around the esports industry. So I'm here to speak about a little bit about what is important to know and what is important to follow when creating an esports brand, especially for the Asian region, since SiGMA Roadshow is obviously focused in Philippines this particular event, and we wish to focus more on the Asian side of things. So, what could be considered a little bit different, starting off from top, would be the different games that are more popular in Asian region, the Asian continent, rather than let's say America and Europe. The biggest example there would be that CS:GO, which is sort of dominant in the other two regions, is not so dominant in the Asian region. The reason could be because that game was outside of esports was kind of a lately adopted in the continent, and CSGO has been in Europe and then America since before Global Offensive, so that's 20 years. The other small challenge could be that the game is a little bit more demanding and it would not run on every device. Therefore, if you cannot really play the game, it will be hard for you to be a fan as well. So that created a little bit of a challenge, which throughout the years I think it's solved because you can see that the sort of the penetration of streaming and everything has become super popular, and people can follow their favorite game in many other ways, even if they don't have the proper hardware. Other challenge I can think of is the differences in the devices. People using different browsers, different blockages from their ESP providers. Of course, different languages in each of the countries in Asia. That creates kind of local environments that can be then targeted separately. So it's important for you to localize your site in any possible way, starting from the language and ending with specific views that are very, very, how to say, rare for other countries or continents. For example, there's special views that you see in Korea for betting that usually don't see anywhere else. There's, a term called Asian view, which is a term for a reason, and it means that you should display the markets in a way that Asian people are used to see them. Have more markets open on the first page with all the handicap and total options, rather than the European style of having just a match winner, or the American with the spread and total before the match winner. So again, for every country in Asia, you need to make your homework and pretty much decide to step up there. If you know that there's also another challenge like the bandwidth, which in some countries could be a challenge, then your site needs to be made in a way, or the version for that country needs to be made in a way that it's not so demanding in terms of resource. So you have less ads, you cut the live streaming, and many other optimizations you can apply to facilitate the betting, which at the end is the most important part of a betting site, right? You can always watch a match somewhere else. You can always open a second tab with the stream, but placing your bet is the main goal on the betting side. There's also throughout the years many organizations have been created locally, so many people are now having their own League of Legends kind of servers, their own Overwatch tournaments, their own Overwatch leagues. Dota has been slightly pushed back a little bit because of the younger crowd not being able to play it so much, and it is more hardware demanding and much more harder as a game itself if we compare it to titles like League of Legends or other now very popular mobile MOBAs like Arena of Valor, Mobile Legends, if you can. Shooters have become very popular in mobile devices recently. You've seen Call of Duty releasing a huge game. Fortnite has been in devices for over 2 years now. Um, there's also, again, always there is the special offers that you need to consider for the region, considered in the currencies and calculated in the, if you're doing a broad Asian operation, you need to make sure that the localized content has all been counted properly and make sure that all offers have the exact nomination that can fit the different currencies in the different countries, because there's big difference from China to Vietnam and then from Vietnam to Thailand, obviously. And what I wish to say is that we hope that from next year we'll be able to travel again to meet with everyone on the show in person and be able to have amazing SiGMAs like always. And I thank everyone for the opportunity, and I wish you a successful roadshow in Manila this year.
And with that, we're coming to the close of our SiGMA Roadshow Manila. So once again, we would like to thank the speakers, the sponsors, and the exhibitors that contributed to the success of our expo. And to the viewers, thank you so much for tuning in. Now, over the last 2 hours, we went over everything gambling in Manila. And throughout 2021, the SiGMA Virtual Roadshow will take on a new jurisdiction every month. And the SiGMA Virtual Roadshow will be back on its 4th edition on June in Germany. So don't forget to join us there and visit our website at sigma.world for more info. So this concludes this expo. Thank you all very much for attending, and we'll see you again next month.